What's good, y'all? Welcome to my first video of 2021. Now, over the past year or so, my process has changed a bit. I dropped some parts and adopted some new ideas and philosophies to further shape and streamline my technique. Such is the way, I suppose, I tend to do this every now and again, refining my approach to reflect my aesthetic while increasing productivity and efficiency. Trying to find that perfect technique that really doesn't exist, but still pursuing it anyway. As this is my latest attempt at doing this, I wanted to share the process with y'all and go a little more depth on the glazing and detail stage. So before I talk about my new process, I briefly want to go over my old one. I'll also link my older process video at the top. So first is the underpainting to establish values. Then was the first painting. This focuses primarily on color, and this is also the first opaque layer. The second painting focuses on modeling using both value and color respectively. And the third painting focuses on glazing and detail. So the first change I made to my process is to take out the first painting altogether. I initially used this as a buffer and intermediate step to help ease my way into color. Since that time though, I've grown quite a bit of confidence using color and felt like this part of the process was sucking more time than was necessary. So now after the underpainting, I go straight to modeling. Or at least that's my intention. In reality, it's more along the lines of somewhat a dead color layer. I still go in one area at a time, moving on only when I feel like I can do no more while the paint is still wet. Even though it's only one layer of paint, it still takes the most concentration, labor, and hours to complete. This is because when I'm modeling, I'm focusing on both color, edges, and values all at the same time, so it can be a pretty daunting task. This is also the stage where I get the most frustrated. Hardly anything looks the way you want it to, the colors aren't right, the values are too muddled, and the edges are all over the place. These thoughts and doubts continue until I pretty much cover the entire surface, which can take anywhere from 2 to 5 days, depending on complexity. During this period, it's easy to start panicking, and usually where inexperienced artists give up or mess the painting up further. In case of the former, keep in mind that it's just part of the process. Have the confidence and courage to push through it. You will eventually get there. In case of the latter, it's good to take a step back. Either walk back and view the painting from a distance, or just take a break. Walk away from it, go for a walk, do whatever, play video games. It doesn't really matter. The important part is to come back with fresh eyes so you can evaluate it properly. It's important to constantly analyze your painting as well. Just take a few step backs and just look at it, study it, and try to figure out why whatever it is that you're working on isn't working. Flip it upside down. You can also photograph it and take it into Photoshop and then tinker around in it to figure out the best solution instead of trying to do the process on the painting itself. Really, it just boils down to whatever it is that you can do to get a fresh perspective. After all the areas are filled in, I let it dry, usually for a day or two, and I start glazing and detailing. Because I have one less opaque layer to work with, I compensate more with layers of semi-opaque and translucent scumbles and transparent glazes, which in my experience, I think gets the result that I want, which is having more nuance, color, texture, and value using multiple layers. I start every new session by applying glazes. An important thing to note about glazing is to keep the medium you use to a minimum. Glazes are more about the amount of paint that's on the brush rather than how much medium you use. The surface will be dry when starting the painting session, so oiling out the surface with a little medium will help the glazes go on smoothly. And speaking of medium, in case anyone wants to know, I use Walnut Alkyd Medium by M. Graham & Company. I use glazes to either darken an area or raise saturation, sometimes both. With the glazes in, I start applying semi-opaque and translucent paint. I only use fully opaque paint when I want to cover something. Otherwise, I prefer to have each layer show through. This application of paint works particularly well for skin. Each layer will build off of the previous, creating nuance and complex color. Some colors and effects can only be achieved by doing it this way. Applying details like patterns and textures is much easier for me to paint when working this way as well. Having the underlying form there and just scumbling the pattern in is quite effective. It's almost like an overlay, color, or soft light layer in Photoshop. Doing fine detail on a wet painting is extremely difficult, at least it is for me. Things like scales, scratches, certain water effects are some of the things I save until this particular part of the process. This is where I start implementing impasto as well. I'm naturally a pretty thin painter, so impasto isn't very heavy when I use it, but the contrast against the thin passages helps. As I continue to practice and get more comfortable with it, I hope to achieve an effect similar to that of Rembrandt, with heavy impasto in the lights and thin glazes in the shadows. Overall, I go through this process numerous times, anywhere from 3 to 4, sometimes more, depending on the effect I want to achieve and the deadline I'm under. This is by far my favorite part of the painting. It's really hard to mess up the painting once you get here because all the groundwork in the first painting has already been laid. The time spent on each painting session can be as little as an hour or as long as 8 hours. Most of the time though, especially at the later stages, it usually goes between 1 to 3 hours. This is why I tend to work on multiple paintings at a time, usually 2 to 3. It allows me to work on all 3 of them in a day if needed, especially towards the end of each of the paintings cycle. So I could work on a painting for 1 to 2 hours and then put that one away and then put up the new one and work on that one for about 3 or 4. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Happy to share my process and talk more in depth on my glazing process. As always, be sure to subscribe and leave a like on the video. If you have any questions or topics you want me to cover in a future video, leave them in the comments below. See you all in the next video. Peace.